Need to double check to make sure I'm live and that everyone can hear me. And I had an original plan for this space. I was going to dig deeper into the philosophy of the parallel mind. I've gone over that a number of times, but I love going over it again for my own memory's sake, but also to bring in new people to our particular movement, because the movement to planetary computation is one that I think is not necessarily inevitable, but there must be a level of inevitability for bringing it about, or else we risk the survival of our species. But instead of going into that subject today, I want to come really down to earth, pun intended, and discuss our current parallel society predicament. We're going to talk about today, and I'm going to try to be as circumspect and as unbiased as possible. We're going to talk about the situation at network school. And then we're going to get into how the landscape for parallel societies is shifting, but also how, in many ways, it is staying the same. Right, friends? And then we can get into the future of parallel societies for the purpose of building this parallel mind. I also want to spend a little bit of time on this episode talking about the logo strategy and how it can be juxtaposed with the other movements, especially one as diametrically opposite as the network school. So first, I want to make sure that I'm coming through. Let me double check my settings here. I'm assuming you guys can probably hear me. I would be getting messages, I think. Yep. Okay, good. Just had to double check myself because I can't on Restream, it's very hard for me. I haven't figured out how to pull in the chat yet, and I'm gonna have to do that soon. Okay, so you guys are probably familiar with network school, right? First, let me give you just a bit of background. So I was part of the first cohort at the network school. The network school is Balaji Srinivasan's, who, as you guys probably know, was the former CTO of Coinbase. He was also a researcher, an academic, and a lecturer at Stanford, if memory serves. And he also wrote the popular book, and in some ways, the book is a quintessential reading. I don't want to detract from the book because I think there's a lot of good material in it. I am going to have critiques. I'm going to try to, like I said, not be too biased. I'm going to blend in the positive. But the book has been extremely influential, albeit you guys have heard me talk about this and bloviate on this a lot in the past. The book is also, it has a dearth of scholarship, in my opinion, and has totally and completely left out the true origin story of the network state movement, which is the cypherpunk and the crypto anarchist component, right? Who are the original inventors of the network state. Now, I don't want to sit here and claim a no true Scotsman fallacy and claim that, the anarchists, they're the ones who created it, crypto anarchists created it, therefore they own it. It's not really like that. To me, this is more about honest and accurate scholarship and reflecting back on the people whose ideas really shaped this movement. That's personally important to me. That's why I mention it. And I do think that people should be properly educated on the history of the quote unquote network state or parallel society movement. If you want to go even further back, of course, the OG parallel society that had an activist component was the parallel polis movement in communist bloc Czechoslovakia, right? Which they actually won that particular movement. Their activism via creating a parallel polis ousted the communist regime during the Velvet Revolution in, I believe, 1989 is the date. So this is just a bit of background on Balaji. I personally went to the network school. You guys know that I've been embedded in this space for 3 years. I've went to a number of pop-ups and a number of different community events and a number of different conferences related to this movement. I think that overall, the experience at network school was really good. I think a lot of things were done extremely well. I do think there were some gaps. Some of those gaps, I'm not going to get into all the details of where I think the gaps were, some of the issues where I think some of those have probably been resolved since I've been there, because I want to be fair and say that that was the first iteration, right? It was the first cohort. And as we all know, even pop up cities, new civic structures that I agree with and that my team agrees with, and that the supporters, you guys listening to this, agree with, also have issues, right? None of them are perfect, and none of them will ever be perfect if we're thinking in utopic terminology. But I do think there is a certain kind of mindset, and I don't want to speak just about biology here specifically. There is a mindset in this space that I want to speak to at length here. This is this Silicon Valley kind of mindset. And I'm going to talk to you guys about this before I get into what actually is going on at Network School. So bear with me, and I will arrive at the deeper points as we move through this particular show. So, gosh, where was I? So thinking about this situation with this, the mindset, that's where I was. Yeah, thinking about this situation with the mindset. There's a Silicon Valley mindset that's very much deeply embedded in this network state ecosystem. And this is hugely problematic. And when I say Silicon Valley mindset, I mean this idea of moving fast, breaking things. There's also a bit of a crypto mindset. This notion of permissionless, right, pervades everything. And there's nothing wrong at all, like ethically, with these ideas. Now, practically, pragmatically, and strategically, there's massive shortcomings, right? It's not just that it's a shortcoming, but it creates a psychological blind spot in people, right? Because these ideas are extremely valuable when you're creating software, right? When you're doing software development and engineering, like the lean startup model that Eric Ries in his book talks about, that a lot of, even if it has been implicit, a lot of founders in crypto and in the network state space, parallel society space, have adopted that mindset fully and wholly. And their idea is that we can move into these territories, physical territories, and we can bring our community physically, people in person, boots on the ground, and that we can replicate this same scheme, right? Because it works wonderfully in the software environment, right? Where, let me explain how it typically works in lean startup, sort of move fast, break things. The idea is that you create a prototype, right? You build a product, and that product, you don't fully see it through to the end. You build mostly an incomplete product, a product that probably has some shortcomings. You put it out onto the market and you get user feedback, right? So you go through this feedback cycle, this iterative cycle of they call it continuous improvement in lean startup, right? So you put the product out there, you're seeing you're getting feedback from the users, and then you incorporate that feedback and you improve your product, right? And you do this over and over again, not really caring if you break aspects of the software, not caring if the software is complete or not. This is a pervasive mindset in crypto and in network state space. Now, here's the problem. This particular mindset, this aesthetic, if you will, for development and developing protocols, works nicely, again, in the cloud, right? On the internet, building software. Even if it's locally on your computer, right? Works perfectly fine. Now, when you try to apply this kind of mindset to the ground with physical people, people aren't people in groups coming together, working together, having relationships, coordinating. When you bring this mindset in and you try to move fast, like, and you maybe incidentally treat the people in the community as the product, and then imagine what happens, right? Because if you have even implicitly this lean startup mindset, you don't really care about the people. You don't care about the local community that surrounds you. And so you're more likely to cause harm, right? So when you move fast and break things online, it doesn't matter because it's just software, it's just bits, right? If you move fast and break things on the ground, you're breaking people, you're hurting relationships, you're causing problems. This view is probably more entrenched, my friends, in the entrepreneurial mindset in this space, when you're the one that has to deliver the product or service in a set period of time for a particular group of stakeholders. Now the stakes are much higher, but also the bar is higher, right? So you are having to move fast, break things, deal with people, break people, and hopefully turn a profit on something that is really not guaranteed to turn a profit and is really based in like an experimental public good and not an actual kind of market product, right? You can't market a community of people in the same way you can market software. This is in my opinion, this is the crux of the problem, right? When you do this, and your mind is working in this fashion, right? And you're moving and you're moving. What you're doing is you're creating externalities. You're developing a zero-sum game complex on the ground. I really hope that right now for this particular show, that people in the network state space, I hope founders find this space. I hope engineers find this space because this is the thing, this is the piece, right? This is the secret ingredient that's often missing from these communities is that there's more concern and care about the technology that's embedded in these spaces or that surrounds it. There's more care and concern about getting the thing done, creating the new network state, this building the future, pushing fast, having progress. That is all, like, if that is the sum total of all of the mindset and the whole ethos is developed around that, you're going to run into problems. Okay, I think I've done my rant there, and hopefully I have articulated the point well. It doesn't track. And now the thing that I will probably hear and that I haven't heard yet because I haven't I haven't done like a public talk where I've gone out into a conference and had this particular discussion yet. I'm looking forward to that day. So you guys are having conferences. I'm happy to come chat about this. But what is going to ultimately happen as a result of that, and I believe is starting to happen, is that, to take the turn of phrase from the Wolf of Wall Street, remember in the Wolf of Wall Street, right? Whenever the father is telling Jordan Belfort, right, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, he's been boozing and drugging and cheating and scamming and all the stuff that he's doing in the financial sector. He said at some point the chickens are going to come home to roost, right? So I'm of the mindset that the chickens are inevitably coming home to roost, and they will continue to come home to roost as long as this developmental ethos is attended to. And I'm not going to go into the trenches of this particular direction we could take it, but I do think that some of this mindset is also festooned with the trappings of a technocratic mindset, right? Part of technocracy is lean startup, right? Part of technocracy is developing for stakeholders. Part of technocracy is meeting the bottom line. The other part of technocracy is holding power over others, leveraging the state to mete out your punishment against people who don't follow your rules. And it is the ultimate goal. I think the apotheosis, the primary aim of the technocratic mindset is to be a philosopher tech king, right? Basically, all these neo-reactionary sort of dark enlightenment personalities have done is they have redressed the Plato philosopher king from the Republic into a technocratic fascist king, right? It's not a new idea. It's not novel. It's just a redressing using modern terminology and lingo with that original idea that there should be a ruler who is smarter than everyone else ruling over everyone. And I want to be very clear when I articulate this. I wholeheartedly and vehemently disagree fundamentally with that idea. That's a horrible idea, right? The anarchist in me stirs proudly whenever I vent and ventilate about these particular notions. So something else that I want to, and I don't want to spend too much time tooting my own horn, but when my partners and I, co-founders of Polis Labs, were at the network school, we had an epiphany, right? We realized very quickly and early on that some things weren't right. And again, I want to try to be really diplomatic about this because I did enjoy the experience, like I said, and I do think that the community is doing things really nicely and quite well, and that it takes a tremendous amount of courage to do this in the first place. So props to the team and the guys for doing that. But I still think, with that said, there is that Silicon Valley drive, that mindset of move fast and break things, possibly even technocratic leanings that are bubbling at least beneath the surface of this particular movement. And with those all of those ingredients combined into the cauldron, what you ultimately get out of it is a recipe for disaster, right? Now, here's the hard question that we have to ask is, and I guess this is a good time for me to actually explain to you guys what is kind of what is happening there, at least from my perspective. So, and I'm going to pull up my document here. I took some notes before this, so I want to make sure I get it right. So basically, there's allegations of Israeli nationals participating in the network school under like dual passport. So basically, the main claim, and I don't really buy this claim. There also, I don't really put a lot of stock into governments to do the right thing. So I definitely don't blame network school for a lot, at least part of what's happening here, because this is just what governments do, right? If we're being honest with our sort of anarchist roots, but they're claiming this is like a refuge for Israeli nationals, maybe even like a training camp or something. Create some conspiracy tinfoil hat type stuff going on there almost. So I don't really buy that this is the reason. This is like a something that they can talk about loudly and that people will commiserate with, I think, in the coming from the Malaysian government and the people. But what this has created is a situation where they are being heavily investigated, right? But I do want to make it clear. I agree with Balaji's claim that the Israeli national thing is largely likely fake news. It's just a cover story for a corruption based agenda. So what's happening now is during this investigation, there's there was a like some licensing requirements that they didn't adhere to allegedly for some of their buildings. So there was a cessation of business notice. Balaji is coming out and say, like, there's some sources saying that this is detrimental to the whole movement. Balaji has come out publicly and said that this is really a non-starter. It didn't cause any issues. It's just things that need to be rectified. I think a lot of people who are kind of in the know and understand how these kind of political dynamics work, they see the writing on the wall that this is just the beginning of a continual harassment. The sort of what comes to mind is some of the like earlier woo fuckery that surrounded Prospera, right? With some of the complaints from the government, the regime there. And it is very natural, by the way, for governments to be hostile to in these kind of situations. Parallel societies, especially technologists coming in wanting to build technology, etc. Now, here's the other side of the story. And again, I'm trying to be as circumspect as possible and trying to be as broad scoped in this analysis as possible, so as not to show too much bias toward my position. But I do think that there could have been a lot more work done in community building, right? Local, and I mean local community involvement of the local community. I think that probably the network school is could use some assistance, to say the least, with working with locals. I think there was a mindset from the beginning that because this is a synthetic island, right, that there is not a problem being here and that doesn't really matter and we don't have to worry too much about the locals. So you have to remember, whenever you go into these spaces, whenever you go physically into a community, you're not going into a blank slate. It's not tabula rasa. There are people there. There are locals. There are indigenous populations. There are people, right? There's a species-wide context that has to be taken into account. And not only does it have to be taken into account, but it would behoove most of these individuals to make actual content or to make actual contact with the locals, to not only make contact, to talk to them, to get to know them, to understand their needs, to understand their concerns, to understand what they think about what you're doing. And if you're not trying to get local buy-in, it is very possible that you can come in looking like at very least, a neo-colonialist, right? Like you're coming in as a conquistador, as a conqueror. You're trying to take over these communities. And there are some people, and I want to give props to there are some folks, some organizers, some community standards that have already been set, right? And Polis Labs, by the way, the organization that I co-founded, is actively conducting research on local buy-in. You can actually go and read our research. We conducted it at Edge City, and I want to sit right here and give Edge City props. We conducted research with locals, with, of course, some research-based caveats, with some disclaimers, right? With some research shortcomings that really couldn't be helped in the time frame that we had, but it's honest research. But we learned that the locals there are actually very happy with what Edge was doing, and Edge had made an active effort to integrate with the locals, to be friends with them, and to make this part of the community, right? So props to Edge City for doing that. Of course, the political dynamic is a bit different because Edge is a temporary pop-up currently, right? And there has not been there, I mean, I guess there is a push for eventual permanent settlement, to my knowledge, but it does change the dynamics when you just show up to a place, set up shop, and you want, like, a permanent s positioning. That it changes the way that you should think about moving into a space. You should consider what the strategy should be for integration. You should consider how what you're doing is going to impact the local community, how it's going to impact your optics, how people view you on the international stage, especially if you stick out like a sore thumb. All of this stuff has to matter. But here's the thing, this is the main point that I'm bringing about. If you move into these spaces and you're not thinking regeneratively, if you're not thinking civically, if you're not geared toward very considering governance a very serious problem, and not thinking that you can just move into a territory and wow, you have the local governmental rules, so you're fine. No, a new community is also its own petri dish of experimentation that also deserves respect. And by that I mean that the local the people that you invite in should also have an understanding of the rule set, and there should be an attempt to develop culture. This is all really hard stuff. And some folks in the space have not taken it to heart and seriously considered it. So again, and after this, I'm going to get into some another good example of how I think strategically we should go about developing these parallel societies, because this plays into the ultimate bigger picture, right? Which is constructing this parallel mind. But we are in, admittedly, an adversarial environment. There are going to be people and governments and institutions and power players that don't want to see these communities come to fruition, that do not want to see them succeed. So again, this is partially why Polis Labs was created. This is why we co-founded the organization. Its primary goal in terms of its vision is to see that these communities don't turn coercive. Nobody likes coercion. Nobody likes being forced to do certain things, but there's a lot that plays into that, right? Local buy-in, right? Not being a neo-colonialist, not being someone who wants to just rule over others like a dark enlightenment philosopher king. The whole purpose of this is to create a better world and to transform the way that we do things. And the way that we do things as a collective human species right now are frankly awful, right? We are creating a lot of externalities as a result of ongoing industrialization. We are creating the distribution of many different kinds of harms as a result of zero-sum game dynamics. We are creating an additive externalities to the polycrisis. on ad nauseum, right? So we have to really think about risk management, this concept of wisdom. How do we do things with a wisdom facing method, right? And uh, because I think the mindset also that goes along with sort of this move fast and break things, let's just embrace permissionlessness, even if it we're not asking permission for locals who are embedded in a context in a particular ecosystem. What this whole mindset does is it doesn't bring to bear a lot of these risks. It doesn't bring to bear a civic strategy. It doesn't bring to bear a governance strategy. Like, who's thinking about those things on your team? And this isn't just pointed at one given person. This is just generally across the board, right? Yeah, sure. Maybe you even have like a legal structure that you developed with your attorneys, but is that really taking into consideration the full scope of the local concerns? Of the geopolitical risks and dynamics of the local government. Like, what is the overarching mindset and strategy regarding this stuff? The thinking has to be tremendously broad, forward thinking, and it must include, for civic survivability, the notion that we want to be wise stewards of these locations, right? All right. So let me give a profound example of one of these communities that I think are working really nicely, right? Or one of this like one of the ways to approach this in a very strategically organized manner. So Logos, of course, has the Logos Circles movement. Logos Circles is structured completely antithetically to something like the network school, right? So network school has an intention of being a network state, playing at the reins of power, or trying to grasp at the reins of power to solicit crumbs from the table of thrones, right? Playing the Game of Thrones. It's about getting diplomatic recognition from the nation state. It is effectively bringing novel technologies into antiquated governance technologies and hoping for the best. And again, it's not just Balaji who's guilty of this. There are a number of people in the space that harbor a similar mindset. So I see Logos as one of the few that have gone, not taken like a more of a middle ground, but have completely adopted a different strategy for this. And what this strategy is to create community-based cells in pre-existing cities all around the world, starting extremely small, not having some grandiose vision for creating some new nation state where just a different group of actors get to have the philosopher king type of power. Instead, it's moving into a space and putting local community first, putting the people who are already there first. I'm really passionate about this idea. I think it's one of the most fantastic ideas in this space that anybody has ever had, right? It's not about the technology first, right? It's not about how can we push forward and progress as quickly as possible. It's not about the bottom line. It's about working with local communities to solve challenges that they face. It's as simple as that. At Logos, this is referred to as a winnable issue. Winnable issues are just governance failures, right? That's another way to think about them. But listen, this is why strategically this makes most sense to me. You're solving a problem that governments don't have the capability to solve, that local corporations don't have the capacity or the want to solve. It doesn't have anything to do with their bottom line. Governments are incentivized to accumulate their own power and to play at zero-sum games. They're not interested in solving these problems. You see, this is a tremendous opportunity for success at developing a parallel society. So what happens, this is thinking about this over the long term. What happens is these communities, they grow, they have totally on a fundamental level embraced the local community. Logos isn't coming in telling them what to do or how to do it. Instead, it provides This is a term that I love that's been going around. It provides a listening layer. A listening layer. Write that down. A listening layer is a layer of community activity that establishes the local community as the folks who have the concerns, the folks who want to actually improve their lot in life, improve their community, make it healthy, more regenerative, more prone to flourishing. And there are luckily there's a and I want to give props and credit where credit's due. There is a segment, although it's small, it's a growing segment of people in Web3 in this like refi, regenerative finance, regenerative community organizations like refi DAO that my friend Monty has founded. Also thinking about Kevin Owaki's work with Gitcoin and with thinking about like quadratic funding and doing regenerative funding models, etc. Everyone who's working in this space, in my opinion, is in this sort of what our friend Michelle Bowens and one of our advisors over at Polis Labs called reconstruction literature. So the ultimate aim is to develop a reconstruction mindset that isn't just talking about crisis, fallout, and apocalypse, but also isn't just talking about advancing technology or looking at progress. This is a particular body of literature, a particular subset of organizations and institutions. This includes CivTech, GovTech, RefiTech, all of these new organizational structures that are dedicated to rebuilding society, reconstructing society after fall, right? Or during fall, or during collapse. So these organizations are going in, they have a community first mindset, they understand the concept of risk. They are, to use the name of my friend that he goes by Benjamin Life, to use his name, they're omni-harmonic, right? They're taking in the vibrations and the wavelengths of multiple different organizations, philosophies, and institutions. They're compiling that. They're conducting research. They're being circumspect. They're thinking about what they're doing. This is the other thing, right? Everyone wants to see a turnaround on profitability. This is another kind of rant that I can go on. This is a problem with enlightenment thinking, with what we can call neo-rationalist thinking. This is also a problem with the voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist train of thought, because this is just a holdover from a neo-enlightenment thinking pushed to its most logical conclusion. Whenever your focus is on appeasing a stakeholder, whenever you lose the mindset that what you're doing is a public good, or you don't harbor that mindset to begin with, you are inevitably inviting in a Molochian dynamic in your activity. What does that mean? So for you guys who are new and just now watching this, a Molochian dynamic is a zero-sum game dynamic. Moloch is the ancient Canaanite deity of child sacrifice. Another way to understand Moloch is as the deity of costly sacrifices. So the story goes, in ancient times, ancient tribes would sacrifice their children to Moloch. Sometimes Moloch is referred to as Baal, right? This is what the ancient Carthaginian Empire, the mercantile empire, worshipped, was Moloch. And during times of hardship, struggle, whether it's a warfare campaign, say, against the Roman Empire as the Carthaginians, or it is a situation where the harvest was poor, people are starving, the destitute are in the streets reaching for alms. These are situations for them that meant they needed to sacrifice children to get a blessing from the god and the gods. The problem is, let's assume for a minute that the god even granted the blessing. Say you're going to maybe win the war, right? Let's just assume for a second that that's true. But this sacrifice is so utterly costly, so destructive, so maligned, and so evil that you hollow your own empire out from the center. You're destroying yourself. You're eating your children. You're creating shells of your former selves. This is horrendous. This means inevitable demise of your civilization, regardless of the short gain wins that you deliver as a result of sacrificing your children, right? So this is the dynamics that we are embedded in modern society. This is the mindset of like an unchecked market. And by checked, I don't mean that there's a government regulation because that's also a corrupting, corrosive Malachian dynamic. But if you don't have organizations with a cultural understanding of a wisdom ethos, of an embedded sense of planetary stewardship, of omni harmonics, of having a more sensing and loving and wholesome and connective personality, well, you're likely to self-destruct and to self-annihilate over a due course, right? This is like the majority story. This is why I created the parallel mind. This is why we think about this direction. It's to improve our lot as a species, to change the way that we think, and to create, to reconstruct, to rebuild our civilizational infrastructure, to stop, at least to prevent as many zero sum game dilemmas. And so yeah, this is the big overarching theme. Just because you are a novel, rebellious entrepreneur, you know in your head that you're way ahead of the curve. You can think, you can outthink anybody, you can play the game so well, you can move into these countries, you can build these parallel societies, you have billions of dollars. Even if you don't have billions of dollars, you think like this as an engineer and you move into these spaces and you're following somebody maybe who thinks like this. This is not a direction that represents a testament to human flourishing or collective betterment or collective well-being. This is a path towards self-destruction. You have to continue to think about how can we do things that don't just benefit me, my community, and my immediate surroundings, my local optima. How can we do things that benefit our neighborhood, our community, the wildlife in the community, the cleanliness of the community, the longevity of the people in the community, the planet, planetary boundaries, the ocean, the indigenous people who live hectares away from you, right? All of these things matter. See, this is why also what's become, and I talked about this in the discussion on philosophical zeitgeists, but what has become so pressing in our intellectual consciousness and conscience is this notion of holistic thinking, right? Or what Nora Bateson refers to as warm data, living data, information that lives and breathes. This is the relational data that we don't always take into account because we're constantly reducing everything in front of us to a smaller picture of approach. Because we have this broken enlightenment conviction that if we just continue moving forward, progressing and delineating everything and atomizing everything and making everything just a separate part of everything else, everything's going to be okay, right? Because this is how we think about, like, this is all of entrepreneurship, this is all of science. We hone in on one particular entity or object and we learn as much as that object as possible. Maybe that object is a problem and that's a problem to solve. The issue with this kind of reductionistic, mechanistic, and linear thinking is that we minimize or ignore or have a blind spot about all the relational interactions that are happening around it, right? the tree that grows in the old growth forest is not just a tree in isolation, right? There's the mycelium network beneath the old growth forest that has grown for miles that all interact and engage with the tree. There's the lichens that are attached to the tree. There's the animal life, right, that surround the tree. There's the microbiome of the soil that husbands the tree, right? There's the sunlight providing a life source for the tree. There's all these things happening together that is the living data. And all of these things have to be taken into account to have more of a holistic understanding of what happened. So again, this is not saying that what the Enlightenment rationale, what the Enlightenment project gave us, it gave us a lot of really nice advancements, a lot of aspects of human betterment, but it also had externalities, right? It had a costly sacrifice. There's a Molochian dynamic. Sure, we have the technology of gods. We're building the technology of divinity, right, in artificial intelligence. We are constructing financial technology that liberates people autonomously and gives them financial autonomy. We have created weapons of mass destruction, nuclear warfare. We have the capability now at a workbench in your home to create novel viruses. But here's the thing, at what cost, right? And we've done all of these things in a narrow domain, right? Focused extremely narrowly on solving these particular issues that we have created all of these downstream consequences, downstream ramifications, externalities. So this is the whole, right? This is especially more, to use a term, visceral, if you will, in this space that we're in the parallel society ecosystem, because we have a lot of people who can bring a lot of resources, a lot of people power, and a lot of ingenuity to a particular problem, to a particular area, to a particular goal, and they can see it through to the end. But I think, see, part of what's happening here is, even if governments are embedded in the same kind of problem, they have a lot of pressure from their local communities as well. There's a lot of different kinds of political dynamics that are happening, and there's some sense, and I'm not saying just in the government, but in the local community, because the local community also radiates with the governments typically, of an unspoken fear that continuing to progress down this path is going to create some kind of problems in the future. This is also, by the way, just to give you an example, this has happened with data centers, right? There's been a huge spread of mass data centers in many different spaces. Here in Texas, where I live, they are spreading vigorously. And there are some cities who are saying, no, we don't want these data centers here, right? Even if they can't explain using the same language that I'm explaining, or as articulate as a fashion as I'm hoping to leverage here, these data centers represent a monstrosity of surveillance, of exploitation, of extraction, of resource degradation, of water use. There's a number of so this is our like holistic mindset infiltrating the subconscious of the people, you see? And it's these things that are happening that need to be made conscious and made explicit. I feel like, to invoke Freud, right, and the analytical psychology school of thought, a lot of these problems that we're currently facing, very few people have the ability and the knowledge to fully articulate what's happening, right? So what comes up are the subconscious fears and concerns that materialize in an actual solution. Like, no, don't build this data center here. No, don't have this parallel society here. No, don't build this technology. No, watch out for this artificial intelligence. You see? And I'm part of what I'm doing here with the parallel mind is I'm hoping to use whatever talent that I have in articulating these concerns to bring awareness to the reasons why this is happening, but also to suggest that the balance is delicate and fragile because we can't just outright do away with all of these technologies, right? There's obvious good that comes out of having the technology of gods and this kind of technology. And so I'm really proud to be involved, and this is why I think we have this like emergent regenerative ethos, and we're really seeing I want to call it a renaissance of animism and the animistic mentality. So just the last bit of the spiel that I want to give, maybe we can go into this more next time, but our ancestors, our ancient prehistoric ancestors were largely animists. They were animistic in their mindset and their thinking. What this means is they saw the whole world as one, as alive, as an organism. In a way, they were more in tune with holistic thinking, even though they wouldn't have had this specific language to describe it with in that time period. They described it in the language of spirits, the spirits of nature, the great horned mother goddess who they worshipped on a springtime evening after a light rain. They saw everything that happened in the world as being intrinsically related to the cycles of nature in harmonious balance with the moon. And as a result of this, they embraced a natural kind of stewardship with their land, right? They were bioregionalists before bioregionalism was cool, right? And what Terence McKenna, one of my favorite thinkers, you guys know, I've taken inspiration from his oratory, from his ideas, from his work. This is what he meant by our whole species being embedded in an archaic revival. We are attempting to revivify the architectonics of the ancient, meaning that we're trying to reestablish the animistic technologies that brought our world holistically together, right? And another person who has come out and who is articulating some similar themes is a psychologist, John Vervaeke, right? When he talks about this idea of the meaning crisis, one of the primary reasons that we are going through a crisis of meaning is because we abandoned this he calls it a one world mythos, the idea that everything is connected and that all of this to get spiritual togetherness is what helped give us our regular meaning, our connection to the Gaian mind, to the earth mind, to the planet. And he said during the axial revolution when the Greek philosophers emerged, when Buddha was at the peak of his philosophizing, when Lao Tzu had emerged to discuss Taoism, when at the very early innings of the axial age and the axial revolution, or was it 500 BC, something of that nature, everything began to change in terms of like the animistic mindset started to dwindle and people started to embrace independent thought, right? This is the whole like Socratic revolution. The invention of mind, as Bruno Snell in his book, The Invention of Mind, describes it, that the ancient Greeks invented the process of thinking about thinking, right? Metacognition. And what all this thinking and this religious thought that God is maybe separate from nature started to appear. and that disconnected us from the planet. And of course, you see where this leads. It leads down the road of disconnection with the planet, with the cycles of nature. It leads down the path of the enlightenment, of the information revolution, of the computer, of Justin Bieber, of all the all the rest of it, right? This is a really a story of disconnection and disattunement. But what this means is that we realize that we have lost something. And this is the subconscious message that we are being reattuned to. That is, for whatever reason in our time, and I think it's out of necessity, because our planet is giving us indications that she's hurting, right? And that there are problems that we need to reconcile. And this is also why I think, by the way, and there's some other folks who have mentioned this, and this is the last thing that I'm going to say, and we'll start winding it down. This is why largely part of the UFO phenomenon is a collective myth. It's a modern archetype, right? Carl Jung wrote a book called A Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And part of his thesis, at least as I understood the material, is that when we start envisioning these flying saucers and these like abduction scenarios where these lifeless, skinless, large-eyed, large-headed aliens take us in and start probing us with strange instruments. This is all a projection of what we have become: isolated, alien, strangers in a strange land, strangers from ourselves, antiseptic, disconnected, a feeling of lack of meaning. You see what I mean? And so this is a projection of our like collective subconscious, and this is how it makes itself known publicly, right? Without having to actually put it into words like the language that I'm using now for you. So it's just something to stew on, right? There's a lot of different theories on UFO phenomenon. Maybe there is some like half truth to some of the actual, the even governments have started talking about the UFO phenomenon recently. But I really like the psychological take on it. I think it makes a lot of sense as a projection, especially since evidence is really lacking on like the physical presence of like an alien phenomenon. Cool. All right, guys. I think the last thing that I want to say here is that, with regards to network school, I really feel for them what's happening. I do want to mention that, regardless of my personal feelings toward network school and like Balaji's personal philosophy, a lot of what's happening is going to be a natural like reaction or response from governments, no matter what we do. And I think that's the honest thing to say, because we're in an environment, I've said this before, where these systems are collapsing, right? And think about when the harpoon goes into the Kraken, right? And it screeches out its death knell. It starts to sweep its tentacles across the ocean over the boat and tries to drag as many people down with it. This is part of that phenomenon. But at the same time, I do want to articulate, if we maintain this regenerative mindset, if we think about wisdom, if we think about risk, if we think about local communities, we should be strategizing very adroitly on how we can prevent this kind of stuff from happening to begin with, right? Some of this means working on our optics. Some of it means working with local communities before we even move into a location. It means like pushing down any thought of like we're superhumans and we can do this no matter what. There are adversaries out there. There are folks who are going to attack us, and we have to work to manage that, right? If we don't, bad things are going to happen to us. And they probably going to happen anyway, but as I pointed out during the course of this lecture, there are people who are doing things extremely strategically, who are thinking about the locals, who are embedded in this community, and who are doing their best to mitigate risks into the future. This is part of a part of a technological mindset, is to ask for permission later, right? Do go the permissionless mindset. And that's fine and dandy and hunky dory, but we should also be thinking about working with as many people as possible. This doesn't say go and work with the government, but there's a lot of power in working with local communities and working with the people that are there. And there's also a lot of power in thinking holistically and not just thinking about your own bottom line, not just thinking about your own ego, not just thinking about your own sense of inflated sense of self. And again, I'm not pointing this out that this is any person in particular, but I do think that this is a typical mindset and a typical way of being in the like the Silicon Valley mindset, right? And this reaches its final incarnation in most worst form in the like dark enlightenment mindset. That, in my opinion, we need to stay as far away from the like Curtis Yarvin. I'll say outright that Yarvin's ideas are horrendous. They are they're antithetical to everything that I personally stand for. And I think that we should be working to create a better society that has regeneration as its core ethos, that has a sense of understanding of human liberty, human autonomy, that there is no technology king that's going to rule over everyone else, and that also has a sense of cosmopolitanism and a sense of plurality at its core. Also, planetary stewardship. There's a lot of really important values that I think a good chunk of our movement has left behind, even though there are those who I mentioned are pushing this agenda forward, right? So you got individuals like Valley of the Commons. Edge City, I think, does a really good job with this. Prospera has gotten better at a lot of this stuff, right? And they have more people who are interested in these kind of philosophies being involved every single day. You have Logos. I mentioned Logos has a really novel approach toward this. So I think we just have to keep building. We have to keep educating people on starting to attune their thinking to where we're going, right? Not where we've been. Cool. All right, thanks so much, guys. This was a pleasure to do. I really enjoyed articulating this. I'm going to try to do my best to share some clips from this particular video, but I finally got to get a lot off my chest and to ventilate. And hopefully I was diplomatic in the process, because I do support a lot of people that have been involved with Network School. I support a lot of the ideas there. I do think there are some challenges and some really poor philosophies that have gotten injected into that. And I think that, again, there's other communities who also harbor similar sentiments. Some of this is of no fault of their own. Some of it's directly related to cultural baggage, right? Cultural inheritances that need to go away, and just bad ideas, right? We are on the forefront, so let's actually be on the forefront. Cool. Thanks so much, guys. Cheers. Peace and love. I think we went just about an hour, and I think I drained every bit of glucose I have in my brain for this conversation. Cheers, guys.